This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of PlantYourself.com, the Big Change Program, and Well Start Health. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a passionate and problem-solving life. So today's guest, Matt Tullman, wants 30% of the U.S. population to go plant-based by the year 2030. And it's not an idle wish. Matt's doing something about it, actually a lot of things. Matt is a longtime policy wonk, entrepreneur, biohacker, and venture capital guy. And he brings all these talents and outlooks to bear on the central problems of our time in history, all of which, he points out, can be solved or significantly improved by a global switch to a plant-based diet. Our conversation is wide-ranging. We talk about Ray Dalio, the investor. We talk about quantified self, a whole bunch of stuff. And I won't get into the details right now so that you can enjoy the conversation as it happens. But before we get there, a couple of quick items in business. One is the coach training program that I'm running for WellStart is about to get underway next week. So if you are interested in finding out more about that training, the first step is to read the description of the program, and then if you're interested, to schedule an enrollment conversation with me, an enrollment interview. And you can start that process at plantyourself.com/coach training. That's one word, plantyourself.com/coach training. Second thing is, quickly, I have a favor to ask of you. I upgraded my microphone. I'm using a new microphone now, and I'd like to switch back to the old one for just a few seconds and get your opinion on, is it worth it? Because it was like $200, and if it's not going to make a big difference, I'm just going to return it. So hold on, and here I am back with the other older mic. Okay, here I am. I'm back with the other older mic. So can you hear a difference? Is it worth the $200 for the upgrade, or should I return it and spend the $200 on something more useful like kale? So there's a few ways to let me know what you think. One is just email me, hj@plantyourself.com, and say, I like the new one, I like the old one. You could tweet at me, @AskHowie, or you can go and leave a comment at today's episode, which is plantyourself.com/273. Anyway, I appreciate it. And now back to the new mic and the introduction. Okay, expensive new mic, end of announcements, and ready for today's conversation. So without further ado, Matt Tullman, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Howard. I'm really excited, and thank you for all you do for the plant movement.
It's a pleasure, and one of the great pleasures is to get a chance to talk to folks like you. Why don't you start by telling people who you are and what you do?
Oof. Well, that might take the entire hour podcast, but I'll try to keep it short. Who am I? Well, I was raised in Colorado, so first and foremost, I like to think of myself as someone who enjoys the outdoors and a more laid-back lifestyle. But my upbringing led me more into the venture capital and entrepreneurship worlds, and as a result, I'm not very laid back. So there's a little bit of a duality, I guess, if you want to put me on the spot and ask me who I am. What I do is a combination of all those things. So I like to think of myself as an athlete, and we can talk a little bit more about that and my lifestyle. But more so, I'm really focused on creating new businesses and helping other entrepreneurs do the same. And in particular, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been really focused on the plant-based space and seeing what we can do to create more products and services that are more conducive to this lifestyle, that make the transition more frictionless, do all these different things that'll ultimately help this movement grow, because that's my underlying goal, and we can talk about why that's my goal. But I'd like to see 30% of the population go plant-based by 2030. I think that'll, in essence, be something of a tipping point, at which point large corporations, politicians will inevitably be looking at that 30% voting block, so to speak, and that consumer group as something that they just can't ignore. And when that happens, more and more of these products will just sort of de facto be vegan because they don't want to cut out 1/3 of the marketplace. And likewise, we can obviously talk about electoral politics, but you see 30% of the population go plant-based, that's enough to elect a president, since we only have about 60% of the population turn out, and 50% of that voting group is worth the win. So that's really what I'm focused on. Like I say, it's all about creating these new opportunities to make this lifestyle that much more fun, frictionless, and easy to attain.
Cool. So let's talk about your business experience before you got into the plant-based movement, because you're bringing a lot of understanding of entrepreneurship, of how things grow correctly. You're coming into a movement that has its roots to some extent in the hippie counterculture of the 60s with, kind of anything related to money was something we'd rather not think about. So talk about how did you become an entrepreneur, or how did you know you were one?
Well, it's funny, actually, and this is, the God's honest truth. I don't think I could have told you what an entrepreneur was through most of my college career even. It wasn't cool back then, the way that Shark Tank and other programs have made it today. And it just wasn't part of my lexicon. I was a political science major, very much focused on international relations. Right out of school, I went into working for a think tank. So I very much thought policy work was going to be my future. I got lucky and had some really successful business guys take interest in me and lure me out of that world essentially and give me some incredible opportunities. And early on, like I said, I started off in venture capital. As actually investing other people's money and obviously working with those portfolio companies. And that gave me an incredibly broad aperture into different types of businesses, business models, what makes for a successful management team, et cetera, et cetera. And I really, obviously I didn't get an MBA, but I like to think that this was more valuable than anything I could have learned in a classroom. I was integral in starting a couple different businesses, none of which I would say was my company until I played my hand in the education technology space. We created a business that helped classrooms and for that matter, districts eventually make that transition to a fully digital way of teaching and learning. And we very much took a different approach in the sense that we weren't looking to digitize textbooks and you get e-textbooks. It doesn't really change that modality in meaningful ways, either for the student or for the teacher. So instead, we really focused on how do we change that dynamic and really use these tools, being all the different technology that we can bring to bear in the classroom, to enhance the learning experience, to make teaching that much more effective, et cetera, et cetera. So I did that for about 5 years. We grew it to a fairly sizable company, then merged it, and I'm happy to say that is still thriving. The new entity is our software is now in every state in the continental U.S., and I think we've even got Hawaii now. So really excited, and that was all about the impact we could make, because I think still today education is probably our greatest tool against most of the seemingly intractable ills that we face as a society, whether that be bigotry and ignorance or poverty, disease, obviously. And I'm, would love to talk about education in this arena that you focus on, because, think about it. We do almost zero education around lifestyle, disease prevention, nutrition, all of those topics, which to me is how you create a well-rounded individual, and a healthy one for that matter. And we don't touch it, with a 30-foot pole when it comes to K through 12 education, and obviously even less so unless that's your chosen career path in higher education. So anyway, getting back to kind of where I come from, I went through a transformational moment, losing 2 loved ones to chronic disease, one cancer, one heart disease. In one of those instances, I spent 30 days in a hospital, literally sleeping in a chair, and it was just absolutely eye-opening. And I can tell you from literally day one, I called my wife and said, stop eating everything. We're vegan now. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'll get back to you. And I think lettuce is okay. But for right now, everything's blacklisted. and we will selectively add items back into our diet as I do enough research to get comfortable eating again, because
Okay.
it was
Well,
just that sort of eye opener.
yeah. So I want to hold on because we've fast forwarded through a lot of things that I'm fascinated about. So we'll definitely come back to education, and we'll come back to your transformation and your journey into understanding what vegan or plant-based is all about. But I'm really curious about, like, lots of people go into business, they have business mentors, they have business experience. It seems like you have the sort of mind that is always looking to generalize principles from incidents. So what did you learn about business, about what makes things successful, about different ways of looking at the world that changed in you from when you were sort of a laid back outdoorsman and then policy wonk?
Well, I would say there's maybe two big things. One is the sort of systems thinking that comes with policy education, so to speak. And what I mean by that is when you have to think about how a given policy is going to actually live in the world, you have to think about sort of first, second, third, and so on in terms of the level of consequences. And so that's really been one of the most useful things to me. I try not to think about anything in my day-to-day in terms of how I run these businesses, and we can talk about those businesses specifically. I try not to think of anything in terms of what this one decision means, and more so, what does this precedent mean, and how does it affect the larger system? And that was largely informed by a guy named Ray Dalio, who was the CEO and founder of Bridgewater Funds, and he's just I think he at one point ran the largest hedge fund in the world, and he just put out an aptly named book called Principles, and he really just thinks of everything as a machine, right? The economy is a machine, your business is a machine. I'm sure it wouldn't be too far to say that he thinks of his life as a machine, and when you think about machines, it makes it really easy to comprehend that you have a system of inputs and outputs, and depending on the design of your machine and the quality of your inputs, you'll get a certain output. And so when you think about business that way, it sort of does a lot to clarify what your actions are and intentions. And like I say, so I bring that kind of thinking both from the policy level in terms of thinking about second order consequences and further.
Right.
And thirdly, just go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I love that, and that's something that I work with clients who are trying to make lifestyle changes about. That, because it's easy to look at things like your environment or the people you work with or your pantry, but to see it as a system, like all the results you're getting in your life are based on this system, or as you or Ray Dalio would say, the machine. To kind of see it holistically is like, everything in my fridge is the result of a system that I put in place at some point. And that, so making, I love the phraseology of like, what precedent does this set? If all of a sudden I decide I'm going to shop at a different store, or I'm going to go down a different aisle, or I'm going to make a different kind of shopping list, that change in the system can then lead to huge changes in output.
Exactly. And, my transformation to veganism actually started by cutting out meat. So effectively going towards a vegetarian diet. I've never been a big dairy person for whatever reason. I don't really know. But I actually noticed that my machine, just to go with the phraseology that we're talking about, my machine that is a body, if I want the greatest output in terms of energy, which, when you're running a startup is a critical factor, how much I can do in a given day, how many phone calls I can make, that was really my focus. And so I didn't really care about longevity, to be truthful. I didn't really care so much about what I was doing to my body. I really just cared about, today and am I getting the most out of my being, mind and body, because I have a team of individuals who are relying on me for payroll, and so I cut out meat because I immediately saw a difference, in doing so. It slowed me down. And so at first I wasn't going to eat meat during the day because it really slowed me down. And then once I did that and I noticed how much better my body felt by cutting it out during the day, I decided, well, my sleep is just as important to energy management. So I better cut out meat at night as well, because, I don't want my body ever to be dealing with that digestive process. And the taste just, wasn't even consideration. It was just, what do I do to optimize my performance? So I think that machine thinking and what you say, the systems and considering the consequences of the food that we put in our body is absolutely critical.
Right. Now it's interesting. I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but there's a whole movement that's come up in the last 10 years, sort of quantified self or biohacking, and the way you're talking reminds me a lot of those biohackers. Dave Asprey, Tim Ferriss, and yet they're all into these minute supplements and things. And maybe it was your policy experience of looking at the whole system that led you to simply eliminating something as opposed to adding in a bunch of things.
So I was very much part of the quantified self movement, if you will, and I definitely fell for that kind of micronutrient reductionist approach to nutrition. And by the way, when I say I was part of that, like, I took it to extremes, as I do with everything in my life, and wore electrodes to sleep, to see what my brain patterns were like. I mean, and this was probably 7-8 years ago, when those contraptions were very much homemade and looks. Why my wife married me after seeing some of the stuff I did to myself in the pursuit of self-experimentation is absolutely beyond me. But and I don't know.
I'm really interested in this. I know this may take us far afield, but I'd love to hear more about the electrodes.
Yeah, there's a company, actually. It went under. It was called I think it was like Zeo or something. And
the sleep thing.
Yeah, so they were one of the first,
that.
and so I that was the only name that came to mind. But like I say, I also I remember ordering kits and trying to hack the Zeo once they went under, and would no longer support the software. Then I took matters into my own hands. But no, I certainly, like I say, I fell for some of the ketogenic philosophy at some point in my life. I remember. Maybe because my parents raised me in a certain way here in Colorado to appreciate, what is natural. I think that's always been the underlying philosophy that stayed true, throughout my life, even when I was eating a very unnatural diet. But to give you an example, I wanted to increase my creatine intake, which is important for energy synthesis and protein synthesis and all sorts of things in our body. And of course, because I was a naive younger man, and still am in many respects, I decided I want creatine from the most natural source. I don't want this white powder you can buy at the store. So, what's the best form of creatine? It's red meat, in many respects. So I ate red meat. I was going to eat it for a month, right? And when I say I ate it, I was getting whatever number of milligrams I was looking for in creatine. So I would bake a big batch of meat, which now, as a vegan, looking back on it, just horrifies me. But on Sunday night, because I was a single guy living in a literally one room, one space apartment with my bed, my desk, and a couch within arm's reach of my kitchen. And I would make a pound of steak, and in the morning I would, have steak and eggs. And for lunch, I would have a steak sandwich. And for dinner, I'd have steak on top of a salad, which, according to many, people, even now in the mainstream, I was eating a healthy diet. I calculated that I was putting it on whole wheat bread and, lots of greens and all those different things. But I was eating a tremendous amount of red meat. And within 10 days, 2 weeks, could not even finish out the month. I just felt horrible. I definitely gained weight, which was the, goal. I was hoping it was muscle weight. I think it was very much a combination of fat and muscle. But I felt horrible, and so I saw that as a very clear signal that something about this was a bad idea. I've later learned that much of it was a bad idea. But then I cut out all meat entirely to see what was the opposite effect. And obviously I lost a bunch of weight and I felt great, and like I say, that was a pretty clear self-experiment, or I should say a clear result that led me down this more vegetarian and eventually vegan path.
Wow. And do you have a sense of, from being in that community, of like how other people manage to stay on these ketogenic high meat diets? Like, are they fooling themselves? Are they getting different results than you? Like, as an experimenter and also as someone who's an advocate for a plant-based lifestyle, like what would you tell somebody?
That's a really good question. I don't, I can't speak to someone else's experience, but I can say that if you're not, really focused on that longevity aspect, and you're looking, to see, physical changes in your body, you can do a lot, which will create results in a short period of time. But that over the long term, I think we would all agree is extraordinarily unhealthy. But I think that, and just to sort of offer a poor example, if you want to go into the gym and come out, with a larger chest, for instance, and feel like you're making gains in the gym, doing what I did is probably a fine idea. And I think they probably didn't feel the differences because, I was really pushing my body in a lot of different areas, getting up at 4:30, 5 in the morning to be on the phone by 6 and finishing my day 9 or 10 o'clock at night. My now wife, we were dating at the time, was living in another state. So I really just worked. And then obviously I also did the gym thing as well. And I think that probably pushed my body to a breaking point a lot faster than many people would experience if they were taking a more tame approach. But, truthfully, I don't know. I think that there's really good reason to believe that the amount of, heme iron and all that fat and everything hitting your brain, like, you can deceive yourself pretty easily into feeling good. But, obviously when you experience what whole raw foods, obviously of the plant variety, does for your body, it becomes a very easy contrast.
Gotcha. All right. So you went into education as an entrepreneur. What did you like? Was that just an accident that you ended up there, or was there a particular passion that led to it?
So I had helped put together a venture fund called Seven Wire Ventures, which has an amazing story about a guy named Cyrus Westfield and bringing together the transatlantic cable. But that'll be for another day. And our mandate was to look at health, energy, and education as the three critical issue areas that we really need to solve as a society. Obviously, when I say healthcare, they're looking at it a different way. But, nonetheless, that was our focus. And we had investments in health and in energy. And I was searching for that next play in education, looked at, hundreds of businesses and never really found something that was going to turn the needle. As I said, there's a lot of e-textbooks, and the greatest innovation there is that, you can highlight the words digitally, but nothing that was really a system that would allow administrators, teachers, students, and parents, and for that matter, other members of the stakeholder spectrum, to all engage in this teaching and learning process in a much more meaningful way. And so I started pitching my own ideas, and one thing led to the other, and those were some of the most fun parts, because it really was just me, and then it was one person, and it was two people, and we were doing everything from like you see now in commercials, picking up the phone and transferring it to ourselves because customer service, right? Like it's that kind of startup. And yeah, like I say, I had no intention. I'd always believed in education. I think that's just something that as a society we have to invest heavily in. But I certainly never went into it like a Teach for America alumni and, had this great idea. It was really just, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I was able to get a number of investors to believe that that was the case. And next thing you know, like I say, we built a pretty successful business.
So what were the principles, the organizing principles in your mind as to what education should be? Did you come at it from a perspective of let's look at technology or let's look at, humans?
Well, I think that, and perhaps the reason why our software was successful, and by the way, we did more than software. We went, kind of soup to nuts, because once we'd made the software, we realized that no one can use software because there's no hardware in the school. So we had to facilitate putting hardware in each of those classrooms. And then once we did that, we realized that the infrastructure was terrible because they can't actually support 30 to 120 to 1,000 students, all sucking up bandwidth at the same time. So we actually had to create a physical hardware to boost the infrastructure. And then once we got all of those things checked off, we realized that these teachers have been in the classroom for 40 or 50 years. They're still using some of the lesson plans that they wrote in the 90s. That's just not going to translate to a digital learning environment. So we had to add on professional services and working with teachers and administrators and even parents to figure out, how do we make this system work in the environment? So like I say, by the end of it, we were doing everything and really kind of being a true partner to the school. So I wouldn't lie to you and say that I came in with a philosophy that said, something beautiful like Apple, where if you control the whole user experience from end to end, you can deliver a better experience. That turned out to be true. Controlling the hardware, the software, the professional development, all of that rolled in together, I think did ultimately turn out to be a better system. But truthfully, that was just an inevitability. I wouldn't want to take credit for that. It was just a function of what we needed to do to even deliver these high quality learning experiences within the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So do you still think a lot about education in your current world?
I do, only because, it comes up every day, whether it's talking to my parents who I'm very thankful are vegetarian and understand veganism, or certainly would qualify as plant-based, depending on who you ask, to some of my old colleagues who are, talk to me about, just being exhausted and this, that, and the other. And inevitably, I find myself in a conversation where we're talking about health or nutrition or disease prevention. And so I am left with so many of these ideas because, that's what I love to do. I love to think about problems and try to think about solutions. And obviously the next step is turning that solution into a profitable business model. And so I often think about, corporate wellness programs or, how mainstream healthcare is delivered and all these different points at which there is opportunity to educate the general populace about the power of plants or for that matter, just the power of lifestyle medicine and prevention. But yet those teachable moments are not coming to fruition. And so I'm left thinking a lot about that often.
So have you looked closely at sort of the field of corporate wellness to see like what's out there and what you think is working and what could be improved?
I haven't looked closely enough. One of the companies that I was involved with just tangentially by virtue of my position managing the venture fund was Allscripts Healthcare, which at a time was a $4 billion firm that really delivered all sorts of technology into your typical setting, whether that's a hospital or a doc practice. And so through that and the contacts that I've made, I've always kept the dialogue going. But, I've never done sort of a deep dive into the competitive landscape. And certainly given what you're doing on when you're not recording podcasts, I'd say that you're the expert in this conversation.
Well, yeah, you caught me. You caught my motivations is to do a little free market research and expert consulting on the corporate wellness.
Yeah, well, look, from hearing some of the intros to your podcast, which I do enjoy listening to, and I think it was David Donahue. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm missing that name. I just listened to it on a run, I think, the last couple of days, and I mean, you guys were touching on all of those key points. So to any listener who hasn't caught that one, I'd say it's definitely worthwhile. But just to echo some of the sentiments that you guys brought up, I mean, I think there's just an absolutely clear value proposition there, and it's silly that we haven't broken into that, because more and more we're turning to corporations to provide all sorts of different safety nets and call it holistic programs to make employees more productive, happier, more fulfilled. And yet I would argue, when you look at I think Google is probably the most famous example. Their idea of sort of like a wellness program is like, providing a chef. But that's not, and granted, yeah, that definitely serves to boost morale. And I'm sure, it increases productivity in a limited sense, because people aren't going off and searching for food elsewhere. But so many of these corporations that are just, pumping, kind of frivolous perks into their workforce, I think they're just ripe for some, call it disruption, in the sense that, bringing in a nutritionist, educating folks about making the right choice for their productivity. Like I said, I mean, it was a very clear awakening when I cut out meat from my day-to-day, just how much more energy I had. You don't have to go into much more, unfortunately. We have a very superficial population. You tell people that they're potentially going to lose more weight, and they're definitely going to increase energy, and I think they'll be interested. You go into the biomechanical functions by which that happens, I think you might start losing people. But I think that at a minimum, we should be telling people about this stuff, and the more that we can build, going back to the machine analogy, the more we can build self-perpetuating machines that take really good information and put it into this workforce and output happier, brighter, healthier for the long run employees. And that obviously feedback creates a better bottom line for the business. I think that there's a brilliant, business model there, which it sounds like you guys have tapped into. It's a win-win-win across the spectrum of people who are involved. So, I think I shared this to you when we last spoke, but I think it's a brilliant thing, and I'm so happy that you finally did it, because if you didn't, I was going to.
Well, let me ask you something, because one of the obstacles we find when we just tell people the good news, right? You can lose weight and increase energy, and by the way, reverse your diseases and get off your meds and feel much more comfortable and save the planet and be a better person and all that. But when we go top line, a lot of the resistance we get is people who have bought into a series of biochemical mechanisms that are pure fiction, right? From ketogenic or paleo or one of the variations thereof. How do you see, and as a successful entrepreneur, I imagine you also have some marketing chops. How do you see dislodging inferior or false ideas when they're held so deeply and they're so meaningful?
That's a tough question. So I don't know that I'll be able to give you the right answer, but I'll give you my answer. I really think that this is something people have to experience. And so I try not to combat their pre-existing beliefs. I think those paradigms are extremely difficult to overcome. And I think that personal experience is perhaps not one of the only ways, but maybe just the best way to get folks to see a different way of thinking. And so what I default to when anyone wants to, compete in terms of our, nutritional intellect, I'll just say, look, this is really simple. There are, 52 weeks in a year. How many weeks in your lifetime? Don't you think it's worth giving this like 2 or 3 weeks just to test? Like what was your pre-existing, or I should say, what was the reason that you chose to eat meat or dairy or for that matter, all of these processed foods, as long as you work out a bunch and counteract the damage? Like, where did you get that notion? And to some people, it's like, well, I read Men's Health on a monthly basis. It's like, well, okay, at least you're trying to get some information. Probably not your best source, but for the most part, people just kind of look at me and admit to themselves that, yeah, like we really just did fall into these habits because our parents, our society, whatever, teaches us from a very early age, and we never stop to question it. We never attempt to test our assumptions. And so, I appeal to people's inner desire to feel smart. And I say, like, wouldn't you think a smart thing to do? The evidence-based, the scientific thing to do? Because I'm usually talking to entrepreneurs who are, try to pretend to be scientists. Wouldn't it be to test your assumptions? Just, give it a month, in the scheme of your entire life. Many of those, thousands of months that you're going to live on this planet, don't you think it's worth testing something else just to see if you feel better? And from my experience, I've had countless individuals who've come back to me and said, hey, I didn't go vegan, but I cut out this or I cut out that or I reduced these things. And like, I actually do feel better. And then I tell them, okay, now do more, and see how much better you feel. And through that kind of experiential awakening, I found much better results than just trying to hammer people with information to try to get over their pre-existing bias.
And so people actually take you up on it. Do they then say, okay, now what do I do? Or like,
yes.
what's your next step?
Well, I would say, and I don't think it's 50-50, but I couldn't honestly, say that I tracked it. But I'd say, a large proportion of people sort of incredulously ignore me or just say like, yeah, maybe. And surprisingly, a good number of those folks come back and say like, hey, I actually did think about what you said and I tried to make these changes and here are the results. There is probably a larger group that says, okay, but I don't even know where to start, like you say. And so I have, a pretty informal email that just says, it's like a starter's guide, and I try to update it every time I send it out to a new person. And it's got all my favorite brands, so go straight to Miyoko's cheeses, or, we have something called the Honest Stand, which is another cheese company that I love. And, it's made out of like potatoes and lemon juice and nutritional yeast. It's like, honestly, the healthiest thing I've seen in the form of cheese. But in any event, I've got a sort of informal email that explains, sort of what that transition looks like from my opinion, or my perspective. And so far, like I say, I've had some good results, but it's certainly not a sort of scientific transformation program as I wish it was.
Uh-huh. So what's the most rewarding feedback you've gotten from someone after they've gotten that email and tried it for a while?
Well, I'd say that what's most rewarding or fulfilling is when they go vegan, which a number of folks have. And I can't say that I look over their shoulder, and obviously I'm using the word vegan a little loosely because I'm sure they still wear leather belts and shoes and whatnot. But in their minds, they've cut out animal products and they say that they're going to live this way, because they think it's right, whether it's for the environment or for their own health, which is, definitely a majority of people, or for the animals, and I'll take any cause or reason that you want is a win for me.
So let's get back to that, because you said all you cared about when you started was your daily output, the quality of the energy and focus that you brought to your work and your life, and you weren't even concerned about longevity. So what happened? Like, where are you now? What drives you now in your 30% by 2030? Is it all of the above, or is there one sort of motivating principle that keeps you on this path?
Well, I definitely think that that is a motivating goal, and certainly gets me up in the morning. I guess, not to answer your question directly, but maybe to give you two answers that may serve to shine some light in this area. One thing that I've found is that, and you alluded to this in your introduction, we have some incredibly smart, dedicated, creative individuals in the plant-based space, and so many of those people are doing incredible things, but much less of them, or a small percentage of them, have turned that into a lucrative business. And let me be really clear. To me, obviously the financial results of a business are important. That's how we keep score. But I'm not so much motivated by the money, thankfully not anymore, at least. I'm very much a fan of business, because I just don't think that there are enough selfless, big-hearted, really wealthy individuals in this world to fix all of our problems philanthropically. I think we have to create businesses that will solve these, critical issues. I mean, like having a planet to live on. We have to create self-perpetuating business models that can, improve this system. Because if we don't, it's going to be a really dark and potentially a devastating future for so many. And you just look at these disease epidemics that we're dealing with in the U.S. Despite how much money the Gates Foundation and all these different philanthropies are pouring into the problem, not to mention government spending, which dwarfs anything from the private sector by probably 10,000 to 1. And yet we're not making any progress. So I really do think that business as a tool, as a mechanism for social change is a really important thing for us to keep front and center in our minds. The second thing, just in terms of what motivates me and what propels me out of bed every day, is that I really went through a traumatic experience, to say the least. In losing two loved ones, and literally holding my grandfather's hand while he passed away, and just seeing the number of oversights and challenges and just blatant mistakes that were sort of par for the course in the hospital setting. I came out of there with a very clear dedication to doing whatever I could to extend the period of time before myself or any of my family members ended up back into the hospital system. And obviously, I can extrapolate that out to say, I don't want anyone to end up in the hospital system, because it's a truly dangerous place to be. And so that's my other motivation, to really do whatever I can to see more people here to make this change, or at least hear this message that there are ways to heal without your conventional medicines. There are ways to improve your chances for a long, vibrant life without engaging in crazy ketogenic or deprivation diets, or you name it. Right? There's actually a very healthy, I would argue, a natural human way of living that is not crazy, especially compared to some of the things we do as humans, and might actually, be the single greatest weapon we have against so many of these challenges, whether they have to do with our debt crisis in this country and how much money we spend on healthcare. Whether it comes to how much money we spend on healthcare and yet don't get any results for it, the disease epidemics, you name it. I just think this plant lifestyle is the solution, and that gives me energy every day I can work towards it.
Gotcha. So what do you think we're doing wrong in the movement that so few of us have lucrative businesses or even like full-time businesses, where so many people I know, like when I first started getting interested in this as a career after working on Whole and with T. Colin Campbell and getting my name on the cover, I thought, oh, here's an opportunity. So I called a bunch of people whom I saw as role models and mentors for me, and pretty much all of them, with only one or two exceptions, basically said, don't quit your day job. So what are we doing wrong that we have to do this most important, holy, beautiful work weekends and nights?
That's a good question. And I wish I had an answer for you. It's a question that I think about often and one that I'm working on. I think one of the challenges is that there is not one single answer, and as much as reading Inc. magazine or Entrepreneur magazine or any of these sort of business oriented literature would tell you, that there's a single answer to how to run a business. I just don't think there is. I think that so much of it can be learned in terms of first principles. But on the other hand, I think it's just all so circumstantial and has to be based on that particular business model and the entrepreneur behind it and the client or customer that you're serving. So unfortunately, I don't have a blanket answer for you. But what I can tell you is that, we should all focus on problems. I like the motto of you should sell painkillers, not vitamins. Because when things get tough, people look at vitamins as a discretionary spend and painkillers as something they have to have, and perhaps that's one of our challenges that, there's a lot of people out there selling vitamins, myself included, and literally, I literally sell vitamins for vegans. So, which is something I would like to talk about because I think it's a widespread issue in terms of the way we're thinking about nutrients. But so I fall into that category because I'm not selling painkillers, but I think that's the case for a lot of people. There's a lot of health coaches out there. There's a lot of vitamin manufacturers. There's a lot of blogs and for that matter, podcasts. And I think those are all absolutely integral to this ecosystem. I just don't think that they're really good business models, and there are many fewer people doing the hard work around thinking about a problem and a business model and creating a business out of that. And I think you're a great example with what you're doing in corporate wellness of exactly what I'm advocating for. I think that that is an area ripe for disruption, and I think you can make an incredible impact. And you've identified a pair, which in the health space, unfortunately, finding someone to pay aside from insurance companies is difficult. But all those things I think is the recipe for a really successful business. And unfortunately, as thankfully probably for you, there's not that many in that area. People are going after the low-hanging fruit, like another food item, another this or another that. And I think those are really tough businesses to be successful in. So I know I don't have a good answer for that question, but hopefully that'll give you some thoughts.
Well, yeah. So when you say focus on problems, I've seen a lot of people who are trying to set up businesses who are basically selling a plant-based lifestyle or selling veganism or selling this amazing way of doing things. And so they're focused on the solution, and they're going out to the market with a solution, and they haven't articulated a problem, and they haven't connected it to problems that people have.
Exactly. And I think those are terribly difficult businesses to grow and to be successful in. And I'll just make it really personal to say that I definitely learned this this lesson through that education business, because I absolutely came at it, with the solution. Technology is the solution. Well, schools can't pay for technology. They just don't have that in their budgets. Now, 7-8 years later, that might change. I certainly hope it is, and it was, during my tenure in that industry. But to kind of parallel with this, once we figured out that the problem was, teachers' time, right? Teachers don't have enough time to grade, to do all of the one-on-one feedback they need to engage parents in the right way, and to do the reporting to the district or to the principal. We then had problems to solve, and we could apply our technology prowess to figuring out solutions to real problems. And when we did that, we found that lo and behold, we had many more customers who had problems and were willing to pay us to solve those, right? And so I think that as we all think about business models and products and services that can work in this industry, and like I say, I work with a ton of different entrepreneurs in a range of relationships, from being an investor to just being a mentor, and I can tell you that it's a daily basis that this stuff comes up. But I think that finding those problems like you have in terms of workplace absenteeism, and for that matter self-insured companies that are paying through the nose to deal with chronic diseases like diabetes, which are extraordinarily expensive and terminal in many respects. They're not going anywhere until the end, unfortunately. I think focusing in on those types of problems and thinking about how our lifestyle, how our knowledge can be applied to that in a simple and elegant way, that I think turns into a lucrative business.
Right. And the second thing I heard you say is, in addition to focus on problems, is like look for payers, right? So it's like those of us in the movement, we want to change the world. We come at it from a very noble philanthropic perspective, and the truth is that there's plenty of things we could do that would make the world a better place, but we would have to self-fund or get a donation because it's not a business model, right? Well, how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on that, so many, and that comes from what you alluded to, given that our movement was birthed, maybe not from hippies, but certainly right alongside the more countercultural, natural bohemian lifestyle, perhaps. I don't want to take too many liberties, but I think that's the challenge. You have these chefs that come at it, and they've got these incredible recipes, but how do you actually think about a marketplace, and how do you think about customers, or in other parlance, payers, and how do you think about creating that sustainable machine that can self-perpetuate without you being inside the business, working on it day in and day out, which is a very difficult place to be if you're trying to grow a business. I think that whole thinking is missing from many of the really well-intentioned entrepreneurs in this space, and frankly, I don't have a good answer for it, except that I'm a huge proponent of mentorship, and if any of your listeners are interested, they can get in contact with me, and I'd be more than happy to help them with their business, just because I've been very blessed in my life to have folks that cared about me and my growth and development as an entrepreneur. And I think it's my role to pay that forward. And I honestly don't have a better answer or any sort of systematized approach that I can tell everyone that would work time in and time out. I think it's just more, you got to look at each day on a case-by-case basis, and obviously there are certain processes and habits and much more than I can get into on an hour podcast that just help you think about a business in a more productive and impactful way. And I think that's what leads to profitable business models. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just sort of, here's what to do.
Right, right.
But find mentors. That's the one thing I can tell anyone to do, is find people who have been there, who have done that, and who care about you, because that's ultimately the most impactful thing that any of us can do in our careers.
Great. So, for people who are listening who are not going to go on the show notes, how can people get in touch with you?
My personal website is Tullman.org, same name, Tullman.org. And there's a contact form in there. I read and respond to every single one that comes in. So feel free to reach out that way.
Gotcha. So you mentioned vitamins for vegans, and that you're selling vitamins. Although I have to say, I've been reading your marketing, and your marketing is the vitamin is a painkiller.
True.
Right. It's solving a problem that many people care about, which is that of the lapsed vegan.
You're right. I should have, maybe I sold myself short. I did give some thought to this business, and let me, I guess, back up real quick and just give you a brief synopsis of where this product comes from. I started this journey very much informed by a book that has your name on it, maybe multiple now, with Garth Davis being the other. I've put back probably 300 titles at this point in the areas of longevity and nutrition, and I've gone as deep as you can into cellular senescence, and I've gone the other direction in terms of let's just go as holistic and as non-reductionistic as possible. And I thought I was doing it really well. I was, for years straight, drank my 64 ounce of Vitamix, pulverized, high quality organic nutrients every single morning. And for that matter, it usually took me, 6 hours to get through that much of a shake because of the flax seeds and the chia seeds and the hemp seeds and just all that went into that shake. It was pretty dense. So I thought I was checking off all the boxes as it relates to my nutritional needs. Obviously we touched on my self-experimentation. So I was getting blood tests, every 3-4 months. And all of a sudden, a few years into this vegan lifestyle, I got a really alarming blood panel, which showed, really high levels of inflammation. All these different markers were off. And this doctor, obviously, because you have to pay a doctor to get medical results in this country, which is a whole nother subject that we should talk about. This doctor looked at him and said, you have rheumatoid-like inflammation, which meant I had inflammation in my body on par with an autoimmune disease. And, he gave me a bunch of names of rheumatologists and all these different people and I needed to go talk to. And he said, I think your vegan lifestyle is, really detrimental and it's going to impair your long-term health. And you really need to start eating animal products again. And I looked at that, like, I can't tell you what my facial expression must have been, but I had done my homework, right? I had all this knowledge at my fingertips. I just knew he was wrong. Obviously I didn't know why he was wrong at that moment. And he had blood tests that would suggest he wasn't wrong. And so I did a deep dive. I mean, honestly, I probably spent, a month and a half just trying to understand every marker on that test and every element that was going into my body and even the ones that weren't. And I discovered that there were definitely gaps in the nutritional profile that I had become accustomed to. And those were mainly B12, vitamin D, and then DHA and EPA, which are 2 omega-3s. And I found that to be extremely surprising because of all the books I had read. I came away, perhaps wrongly, with the assumption that if I just ate as diverse a set of whole natural plants as possible, I'd be fine. In fact, I'd be better than fine. I'd be above average in terms of my health outcomes. And that wasn't the case. And that was some incongruence that really took me some time to wrap my head around. Obviously, B12, that was something I should have been supplementing with, and obviously added in pretty quickly. But I had fallen for, again, this, I think, widely accepted assumption that if you sprinkle nutritional yeast on your food and maybe you have a fortified milk, you're getting enough B12. I can't say if I was or I wasn't. I should go back and look specifically if I was low in B12 during that blood test in particular. But long story short, I added in those supplements, and I'm happy to talk more about them or why those in particular are not abundantly available or well absorbed through a plant-based diet. But long story short, I added those back into my diet, and blood tests corrected themselves. Some other symptoms that I had been experiencing but hadn't linked together yet all went away, and lo and behold, I didn't have to stop my vegan diet. So we created a company and a vitamin supplement. We actually call it a complement because it has just those 3 nutrients in it. And the idea is that that's the perfect complement for your plant-based diet, because those are the 3 nutrients that you're not going to get even in a diverse, well-designed plant-based regime.
All right, so I don't want to go too far into the nutritional biochemistry, but I'm interested enough that this isn't just an anecdotal occurrence that you had these problems and then you created a supplement or a complement to sell to everyone. So give us enough that that someone could do their own research and decide if you're right.
Well, a great place to go for more context is our website, alpineorganics.co, and I can provide you the link for the show notes. And we've got a couple-minute video in there that sort of spells out why these nutrients aren't available to particularly vegans. And I won't go too much into B12. Suffice it to say that I think you have to be really careful just relying on nutritional yeast and the idea of eating dirty vegetables, because as we all probably know, vitamin B12 comes from soil bacteria or bacteria in our lower intestine, but too low for us to reabsorb. So you have to get an outside source. It's just not on your food. You're washing the vegetables, etc. So find some B12 source. It's probably the most important thing for vegans, as I think most people have heard by now. It just, I guess, missed me somehow. Vitamin D3, just quickly, I'll say that that's not so much a vegan thing. It's more of a 21st century thing. If you look at a lot of the clinical studies, as a population, regardless of your meat intake, we are very low in D. And that can have just a horrible impact in terms of sort of long-term health. From cardiovascular to cerebrovascular to multiple sclerosis, vitamin D is super important, and that's synthesized on our skin. And I'm not sure if you know about this one, Howard, but I've actually got on good authority that the synthesized vitamin D lives on our skin and is reabsorbed from our skin. And so if you shower too often, you'll actually wash all the vitamin D that you might have been synthesizing on your skin. And so that, to me, was a good excuse to not shower for about a month. My wife loved it, but I actually wanted to see if my vitamin D would change. So I did a month where I did as limited, bathing as possible as I was allowed to. And turns out I didn't see much of a difference. But, like I say, that's supposedly the story. Obviously, as a result, since we live in boxes, houses, and offices and cars, we're not exposing our skin to sufficient amount of sunshine. And in northern latitudes, it's even more difficult. So if you live in Chicago, where there's cloud cover, a bad tilt in terms of our relationship with the sun, and you're wearing clothing because it's freezing outside, chances are you're probably not synthesizing an adequate amount of vitamin D. So again, I would encourage everyone to talk to their doctors, obviously, get blood tests, but really be considerate about vitamin D as well. And lastly, very briefly, DHA and EPA are two types of omega-3s. A lot of the confusion around this one, and I certainly fell for it myself, because I mentioned, chia seeds and flax seeds and hemp seeds and walnuts, all these different nuts and seeds come with omega-3s. And so I assumed that I was getting a sufficient quantity, but those are actually ALA. And these other two types, DHA and EPA, come from sea vegetables. So, seaweeds and algae, essentially. And so unless you're living in Japan and eating copious amounts of seaweed, chances are you're not getting an adequate intake of DHA and EPA. And when I say copious amounts, I really mean copious amounts, because these are fatty acids. And since seaweed is so low in fat, you are really getting just a tiny bit in every pound of seaweed that you're eating. So, you've really got to be careful about that one in particular.
So,
and again,
so what's the argument from a naturalistic perspective that, even like, how would people get this stuff if they don't live near the sea and eat sea vegetables or eat the fish in which the fat accumulates? Like, how does somebody in Kansas or Siberia, like, do meat eaters naturally get DHA and EPA?
So it comes from fish. It comes from those sea vegetables, like I mentioned, and fish eat that, as you mentioned. The DHA and EPA accumulates in their fat, as does the BCAAs and the PCBs and the heavy metals like mercury and everything else that the fish is exposed to in the ocean. So that's obviously why we go for a lab-grown algae that's totally pure. And I can't make an argument for the naturalistic, someone who doesn't eat fish and doesn't get, their sea vegetables and lives in Kansas. I truly can't. I know that there is a percentage of the population that can convert ALA into DHA and EPA. But I've seen the estimates, because of a genetic polymorphism. But I've seen that it's like 1% that they're able to convert, and so it is an anomaly, or I should say it is a question to me still. It's a very good question that you ask, and I don't have a good answer for it. I can just imagine that, there must be enough fish in the diet, or they benefit from that polymorphism, which I think maybe is 1 in 5, 1 in 10. It's not a high number of individuals that could benefit from that sort of reverse transformation from ALA to DHA and EPA.
Gotcha. And one more question about vitamin D, which we're naturalistically, which is the school that I come from, is that it's not meant to be ingested. And that a lot of studies that I've looked at seem to show that vitamin D might be a marker more than a cause of all the comorbidities. Have you looked into that? Because I haven't looked into it that carefully. Like, are you convinced that there's enough prospective evidence that someone's not doing well and you give them vitamin D because they're deficient and that solves the other problems?
I have seen some good clinical data in terms of, vitamin D as an intervention. Let me say that, as with all things, I'm not entirely convinced with anything. And so I have to step back and say to myself, are we supposed to have a certain amount of vitamin D in our bloodstream? And I think we can answer that affirmatively, given the fact that our body naturally produces it with exposure to sun. And so I would be the first to tell you, if you live in Cancun and you spend a good amount of your time in the sun with your shirt off, preferably, or at least exposing some amount of your skin to the sun, and you get a regular blood test that shows that, whatever it is, 25 L-hydroxy, and it comes back positively in the sense that you're right in range with how much vitamin D you need, I'd be the first to tell you not to rely on a supplemental form. But in the absence of most of us living that sort of lifestyle, I have to look at the data and say, does low vitamin D, is that correlated with some adverse health outcomes that I would like to do what I can, with the information I have, to avoid those at all reasonable costs. And that's why I end up, erring on the side of a supplemental D3. And I will say, I think that we're going to find out in the next 5 or 10 years that there are big differences in terms of types of vitamin D. There's vitamin D2, which is a synthetic form, whereas D3 is a type that's synthesized by the human body. And prior to very recently, vegans actually were out of luck because the D3 we could find actually came from lanolin or sheep's wool, or the oil of it. But now there are actually algae or mushroom derived vitamin D3. So I think, using that and, like I say, going with the plurality of evidence, I'm comfortable suggesting that folks in the northern latitude are better off taking D3, but I'm always looking at the science, and I agree with you that, there's more that we don't know than we do know.
Gotcha. So for someone who's listening who thinks, gee, I might want to do this. So how do we decide, because as you say, it could be a vitamin, right? Something that I take and I don't really know if it's doing any good, but as soon as I have to tighten my belt, I'll let go of it versus, this clearly helps. So what would somebody ask themselves to determine whether they should give complement a try?
Well, I'm a big proponent of, evidence-based decision making. And so, obviously you can go online and look at some of the symptoms for deficiencies. That's not my recommendation, just because I think we're all a little bit of a hypochondriac and we'll find those symptoms one way or the other. And so engaging in a competent, licensed health practitioner to get these blood tests done. The one to look for with B12 is called MMA, because when you read the levels of B12 in your blood, it's pretty fleeting. So if you just had a scoop of nutritional yeast, or you just took a supplement, or I don't know, maybe you just ate a handful of soil, it would actually show that you had a high enough level of B12 in your blood, whereas MMA is more of a long-term metric in terms of what your B12 levels have been over the course of time. Much like A1C, looks at blood sugar over time versus, your blood glucose reading, which is, a point in time. So, and then obviously I mentioned 25 hydroxy D, that, any competent doctor will be able to order that one. DHA and EPA are a little bit tougher, but again, if you're engaging in a thoughtful discussion with your health advisor, which I hope all of us are doing, you can have a conversation about what to look for. For me, it was that low-grade systemic inflammation. So, C-reactive protein and all those different markers of inflammation. I actually took a different type of test, which had a lot that aren't usually measured. And like I say, do it as a benchmark, maybe take complement or take whatever supplements you believe are right for you. Certainly, I'm doing this as much to raise awareness so that more people don't face that discussion that I had with a doctor in a white lab coat, because there's a lot of pressure when you get direction from a doctor in a white lab coat. And that pressure against the vegan lifestyle, I think, can be detrimental. So, my mission in this business is really just to get the word out and hopefully help people make more informed decisions. If it turns out that they want to use complement, great. For me, it was just a no-brainer, because the problem that we were solving is that it took forever to try to find the right option for each of those different supplements. Remember to take each one at the same time, different doses, the bottles run out, it's more expensive. So we just decided it makes a lot of sense to put it all together. That's what my co-founder, Matt Frazier of No Meat Athlete, and I decided we wanted for our families. And so we put it together. But certainly, I'd encourage anyone to think about their their nutritional profile on a given basis, and think about supplementing, get some blood tests, and then go off it for a little bit and get blood tests again and see what kind of changes are there. I think we should all be more informed in terms of how our body's doing, and the blood test is the most accurate way to do that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So it's called Complement. People can find it at alpineorganics.co.
Yep.
Cool. So before we wrap up,
perhaps we'll.
Yeah, go ahead.
I said perhaps we'll figure out a discount code to put in the show notes. I don't want to commercialize your medium, so I certainly will defer to you on that. But happy to offer your listeners a discount so they can give it a try.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just I don't take any money from that, so that's the thing I don't want to commercialize, because I haven't done the research the way you have, and so we'll keep it clean. People can hear what they heard, look it up for themselves, do more research, and I would love to be able to offer people a chance to get more for less.
Great.
So anything else before we wrap up? Anything else new you're working on, or?
A number of things. We are about to launch our website for the 30 by 30 initiative. Like I said, that's our goal, to see 30% of the population go plant-based by 2030. So I'll also ask you to put a link in there. And lastly, I'm really passionate about No Meat Athlete. Like I said, my co-founder, Matt Frazier, and I produced Complement, and in that process, we became friends. And now I've gotten involved with No Meat Athlete, and I'd encourage anyone who's wondering about nutrition, or for that matter, looking for recipes or anything in the area of plant-based athletics. He's built just a tremendous resource over the last 8 years, and I'd love to take credit for it, but I really can't, because there's just an absolute treasure trove in terms of the amount of information and resources that are available. So I definitely encourage folks to check that out.
Excellent. Yeah, Matt's a two-time guest on the show, and an inspiration and mentor to many. And someday I'm going to kick his ass in a race, but we may be in our 90s before that happens.
Well, I'll leave that to you guys. I'm always impressed when we talk about like ultra marathons. I fancy myself a runner, but to me, like, long distance is 10 miles.
Uh-huh.
And our team over there are all these marathoners, ultra marathoners, and so conversation quickly makes me feel like I am not as much of an athlete as I thought I was.
Well, you know what? If your next project is looking at 2030, I would say you're an ultra social entrepreneur.
Fair. It is certainly a time horizon. We originally had said 20% by 2020, which, truthfully told, the way it's going, I thought is possible. But my wife, as she always does, usually moderates me and says, hey, maybe just, go for the long run and don't make this too crazy. And I think that was the right idea. But yeah, it's been really exciting to see all the growth. And I always say that, we have to focus on the cultural, the economic, and the political. Political is, for obvious reasons, there's, anything with food and health, it involves the government. So we have to be active there. The economic is where I'm focused, and that's very much, all that we've been talking about, more products and services in the marketplace, the more that we're going to make this transition and the lifestyle, more frictionless and more sustainable. But I also think the cultural element is absolutely important. And that's what you do, Howard. And I think it's so, inspiring to see you and obviously Matt Frazier and so many other folks that put this information out into the world and help people to understand it, to implement it in their lives. I think we're all playing our own role in terms of the various legs of the stool that ultimately is going to lead to this change.
Right on. Well, it's so great having you on the team, knowing about the work you're doing and your vision and your clarity and your passion. And so I'm thrilled that we had this conversation, and I'm thrilled that it's going to go out in the world, and hopefully, wake up some people to go plant-based and wake up some plant-based people to go entrepreneurial.
Well, I certainly hope for both. And again, I would encourage any listeners to reach out to me. Like I say, I get all of the contact submissions on my website directly to my inbox, and there hasn't been one yet that I haven't responded to. So I'm sure it'll be flooded, and I'll have to eat my words on that one. But let's hope so, because I'd love to help any entrepreneurs out there that just need someone to talk to.
Awesome. Well, Matt Tullman, thank you so much for everything you do and for taking the time today.
Thank you, Howard. Appreciate you sharing your platform.
All right, be well. All right, here I am back again with my expensive microphone. And boy, listening to that conversation again just reminds me how grateful I am to have people like Matt on our team doing this stuff in the world with all his experience and expertise and all the blind alleys and wrong turns he's gone down to discover the optimal way for human beings to live on this planet individually and as a grand civilization and a culture. So again, if you choose to try out his product to complement, know that I don't make any money from that. I'm just sharing the information and doing a public service by passing it on. I certainly haven't seen anything in the literature that makes me think that it's an ill-advised idea. So if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the mission of the Plant Yourself podcast, please subscribe and leave that review on iTunes. iTunes reviews have been thin on the ground lately. For more information about WellStart Health and the Big Change Program, check out wellstarthealth.com or bigchangeprogram.com. We still haven't gotten around to redirecting Big Change Program, so you can read all the old stuff, but definitely go to wellstarthealth.com/program if you'd like to find out about our next rolling cohort. And be sure to check out the show notes for today's episode with links to all of Matt's goodies at plantyourself.com/273. If you're new to the show, catch up. 272 archived episodes at plantyourself.com. And of course, it'd be awesome if you would be interested in sharing those on social media, writing that iTunes review, and if you'd like to become a patron of the show at plantyourself.com, look on the right sidebar for the Patreon link, and you can make an ongoing contribution that kind of helps me navigate the financial instabilities of being part of a startup. So thanks a lot if you're already a patron, and if you're not, check it out. My wife and I were actually talking about a little bit of swag, putting together a Plant Yourself t-shirt. So if you think that would be an awesome idea and you have design suggestions, you can shoot them my way as well. hj@plantyourself.com or at AskHowie on Twitter. In garden news, we had a great time yesterday kind of clearing out a compost, I guess you call it a pile, but it's more of like a compost mess, just an area in the garden where we've been throwing everything from corn stalks to weeds to when I pruned the grapevine, and just a giant big mess. And I moved all of that stuff into an actual compost bin that I'm building, and I discovered about 4 to 5 inches of gorgeous soil underneath. So, folks, this stuff works. It's really, really cool the way nature kind of takes care of itself and of us. So we're going to turn that into a bed over this next few days and plant some stuff. And we're also thinking about a cover crop of soybeans. So we'll get some edamame and we'll get to watch soybeans grow. In running news, I'm pretty much back to a painless 6 miles a day and longer weekend runs, and I don't have a race on the horizon yet. I'm still taking it easy and learning how to use my new body, my new hips, my new pelvis, and I'm going to let myself sort of speed up naturally. So it's kind of fun to be in this embryonic experimentation mode with this body of mine. Oh, and of course, a big shout out to all the missing chins and friends and family who will be traveling to Leadville for the Leadville Marathon and Heavy Half coming up next weekend. I'm a little sad that I'm not going, but I'm mostly not. Last year was pretty traumatic, and I've got my hands full with WellStart and with a whole bunch of other stuff. So good luck, everyone, and I'm sure I'll be posting on the experience when I hear from all the folks who attended. All right, it's time for the thanksy part. So thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. Check out willridenauer.com for more of his beautiful music. And thanks to all you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hadley, Mary Jean Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Burns, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, John Polinovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elsbeth Ellen, Victoria Dolomanova, Leah Storla, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Joel, Michelle Andrew, Josina, Julianne Rollins, Stu Dolnick, Sarah Durkis, Rhonda Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Jaron Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Bedham, Gil Lassert, David Donahue, Blair Seibert, Doro Navizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious Tracy Z, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Lindemann, Roger Stidham, Nick Harper, Stephanie Holmes, Martha Bergner, Nick Ramsey, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Ashley Corker, and Kelly Michia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabine Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Shel Ruthless, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Kate Rose, Linda Ayat, Julie Lang, Home Hedegaard, Isa Tuzin, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Aviva Lell, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski, Plant Power for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Kelly Baker, Miracle Ann, Jesse Sarah Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divot, Joshua Summermeyer, and Dennis Bird. Welcome, Dennis, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends.